people always live in groups, and every group has a status hierarchy. There are people at the bottom, people in the middle, people at the top, and those status hierarchies start very early. By age 5 in elementary school, there are already well-established status hierarchies. So people always live in groups, and every group has a status hierarchy. And what does that mean in terms of people then? It means that at a deep, unconscious level, we have powerful needs to be accepted and liked and become members of the group. I call that getting along. And we have really powerful unconscious needs to get ahead, to survive, to prevail. The fundamental question in human affairs is who shall rule? So the big problems in life concern getting along and getting ahead. And that's actually quite a challenge, because to get along with other people, you have to pretend you like them, you have to pretend you agree with them, you have to laugh at their jokes, and to get ahead, you have to pretty much do what they want. To get ahead means you outperform them. They don't want you to outperform them. As Oscar Wilde said, people can forgive you anything except your success. So getting along and getting ahead, problems that exist in serious tension, and the most successful people, the really skillful people, are folks who can get ahead while getting along. So personality is about individual differences in the ability to get along and to get ahead. So how are we all alike? We're all alike in that we want to be loved, and we want to control, we want some power, and we want some status. How are we different? We're different in terms of how we think about ourselves. We're all different in terms of our identity. Your identity is how you think about you. We're also all different in terms of our reputation. Your identity concerns how you think about you. Your reputation concerns how we think about you. So there's the way you think about you, and there's the way that we think about you. There's the you that you know, and then there's the you that we know. And Freud would say, correctly, that the you that you know is hardly worth knowing. Thank you. And the reason is that you made it up. It's just we're all heroes and heroines in our own little private dramas. And everybody, it's the old joke about the guy who comes home from work. It's a question about identity. Why do you have the identity you have? The guy comes home from work, his wife's in bed, and his best friend's in the closet. And he says to his best friend, "What are you doing in the closet?" And his best friend says, "Well, everybody has to be somewhere." Well, and so why do you think about yourself the way you do? Because everybody has to be somebody. The problem is when you take that somebody seriously. Because it turns out that your identity, the person you claim you are, is something you actually made up and bears actually only slight resemblance to the... So 100 years of psychological research on identity, trying to understand what people are like way down deep, has led nowhere. It's been a scientific dead end. There's no measurement base, there's no taxonomy, and there are no reliable findings. However, if you think about personality as reputation, think of personality in terms of, the you that we think you are, it turns out that reputation is quite easy to study. We have a well-defined taxonomy. It's something called the 5-factor model, and we have a very substantial body of research that's developed over the last 15 years or so. So we can now tell you with some authority, what is the relationship between personality and job satisfaction? What's the relationship between personality and lifetime earning? What's the correlation? What's the relationship between personality and physical health, longevity? What's the relationship between personality and substance abuse? Personality and I don't know, whatever, name it. Personality, we can. So if you think about personality from the point of reputation, then it's a very powerful analysis. So really, really smart people, really successful people. People like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher couldn't even discuss their identity with you because they never thought about that. All they ever thought about was how am I impacting other people? How are they reacting? So really smart players in the game of life pay attention to how other people perceive them and don't spend much time gazing at their navels or doing what we call intrapsychic. Okay, so personality, getting along and getting ahead, and how other people perceive you is a major factor driving how the major decisions in your life come from your reputation. Reputation is the basis in terms of which people hire you, fire you, promote you, marry you, lend you money, blah, blah, blah. So reputation is really the most important aspect of your personality. Okay, what's leadership? The actual literature on leadership is huge. It's immense. It's daunting. And there are two sources of information. There's what I call the troubadour tradition, which are these flights of fancy that you find in magazines like the Harvard Business Review. And then there's empirical research in the academic journals. Both are not very helpful. So to cut to the chase, I would say that that the academic study of leadership, well, the study of leadership that you find in Harvard Business Review is not worth knowing about because that's just fiction. But the academic study of leadership's failed, and it's failed for 3 reasons. It's failed because academics define leadership incorrectly. I'll come back to that. It's failed because academics pay no attention to the subordinates, who are the actual consumers of leadership, and the academic study of leadership's failed because they pay no attention, academics pay no attention to the ROI of leadership. Well, and because until the 1990s, they didn't think leadership even existed. So, it's kind of an impoverished field. Okay, so virtually every writer defines leadership in terms of who's in charge. But I would argue that's a fundamental mistake, because who gets to be in charge of a large, hierarchical, bureaucratic, male-dominated organization? A politician who may or may not have talent for leadership. So what goes on inside each organization is individual struggles for power. It's within group competition. And the people who get to the top of General Electric are going to be different from the people who get to the top of Disney, because it's a different political struggle. And so if you compare the people at the top of these organizations, the only thing they have in common is they survived a local parochial political struggle. So my view is that leadership, if you think about the history of the species and the fact that warfare was absolutely inevitable and the fact that people are basically selfish unless something happens, leadership is about persuading people to stop for a short period of time pursuing their narrow selfish interests and work for the larger good of the group. So leadership is about building and maintaining high-performing teams. That's what real leadership is. And if you think about leadership in those terms, if you define leadership not as who's in charge, but who's good at getting people to work together, then the literature on leadership actually makes some sense. First of all, the right definition is in terms of how to get people to work together. The second part about subordinates, it turns out that, bosses, managers don't do the work group does. And so the leaders have their impact on the group, and how they impact the group determines entirely the effectiveness, the business unit, the performance of the business unit. Specifically, the degree to which subordinates trust their manager or their boss, trust as in I believe him, I think I can trust him, is basically a proxy or a correlate for group performance or business unit performance. So leadership is about building groups. Effectiveness is about the performance of the group, and that depends entirely on how people react to their leader, because they're the consumers of leadership. And then finally, with regard to ROI, and people only figured this out, what I'm about to say, in the last 4 or 5 years. The personality of the CEO explains more variance in the financial performance of a group than any other factor except the discipline or the trade area in which the organization is operating. The personality of the CEO accounts for somewhere between 17 and 40% of the variance in financial performance. It's the most important single factor driving the profitability of an organization. When I started studying leadership in the 1980s, what I discovered was what you always discover, that there was no consensus. There was no consensus. There's still no consensus about what makes for a good leader. So I asked the question back then, what are the characteristics of bad leaders? If we don't know anything about good ones, what do we know about bad ones? Well, the first question is, how many bad ones are there? And the answer, after I did a fair amount of number crunching, is, in my view, in the United States, in public and private organizations, somewhere between 50 and 75% of managers are incompetent. They're driving their staff crazy. And when I first started talking about this in public, I thought I was going to be lynched. I thought I was going to be assassinated. People really didn't want to hear it. But it's just the case. Every working adult, 100%, every working adult reports having spent some significant period of time working for an intolerable boss. 75% of the people in the United States, across the country, doesn't matter when you do the study, doesn't matter where you do the study, doesn't matter what occupational group you study, 65 to 75% of employees say the worst single aspect of my life, the most stressful aspect of my life, is my immediate boss. Full stop. So, and the most annoyed people are your high potentials. So bad management is actually ruining business, and it's because people are concerned. It's because of this. The concern is to get to the top, not to build a team. And if the focus, good leadership is about building a team, not making your way to the top. So finally, then, that effectiveness of organizations drives the well-being of the incumbents. Yes, it does. Leadership drives the effectiveness of organization. Personality, we can tell you what aspects of personality. Personality drives leadership. All organizations have their dysfunctional characteristics. And the best organizations are the ones that make the fewest mistakes. And so I like to close by reminding you of, of Thucydides and the history of the Peloponnesian War, and the Spartans are coming to get the Athenians. Warfare is the common theme. And the Athenians are trying to figure out what to do vis-a-vis the Spartans. Big argument. And everyone's saying, what's the Spartan strategy? What's the Spartan strategy? And Pericles, the hero of the Athenians, the great leader, says, after listening to all this, he says, you know, he says, I care less about the Spartan strategy. I care more about our mistakes. And when I read that the first time, I said, boom, that's it. You know, you can't, all you can do is control your mistakes. You can't worry about what they're doing. And if you do that, things should work out for you. Thank you for your attention.